So good morning, everybody. I hope that everyone is acclimating to the weather. I'm working on it, but I feel winded all the time. So I know, I thought I was in better shape than this. Anyways, so we're starting this morning with a really amazing panel that I think you all are going to learn a lot from. And I'm probably going to learn a lot from too. And before we start that, I did want to say a couple words about yesterday and about NFG and our context in doing work around just transition and new economy. So yesterday in the opening plenary, we heard about challenges and opportunities in supporting communities to strengthen in the face of crisis. We heard about some of the real and difficult individual challenges in doing this work as a funder. And we began to scratch the surface on what shifting power looks like. Today, we'll be having a conversation with a group of thought leaders who are working in different ways on addressing one of the massive and looming challenges of our day, which is an extractive economic system that's designed to produce massive accumulation of wealth for a few and a high degree of income inequality for most everyone else, often while damaging the environment and damaging our health. So it's a significant cross-cutting reality that we live in and have been living in for quite some time. So these conversations are not new. But in many ways, the moment that we're in is new, actually. And within that, I think there are bright spots and hope. And there is a lot of work to be done. So I wanted to say a couple of words about the Neighborhood Funders Group for those of you that don't know our programming and how it relates to the conversation today. So we're structured with projects and working groups, and 4 of our programs, I think, touch on different aspects of what a just transition and what new economy work looks like. The first I'll mention is the Funders for a Just Economy, which was formerly called the Working Group on Labor and Community Partnerships. This is a revolving door of funders that have been working for the past 20 years in understanding the changing nature of work and labor and the centrality of organized labor in those conversations. Today, work is evolving at an incredible pace with new raise-the-floor strategies like living wage and paid sick leave that are taking storm across the country, and a real evolution in the way that work is actually playing out with a loss of protections, growth in contingent labor, et cetera. And so that's a space that we've been grappling with, understanding the context, developing alignment and strategies for funders to try to get some work done related to that. A second program that we launched actually just this June is called Democratizing Development, which seeks to put forward a framework centered on community power building that includes community stabilization, community-centered planning and policy development, and then community control and ownership strategies, all around democratizing the process of building places. A third project to mention is the Funders for Justice program, which is focused on police accountability and racial justice. And one of the evolving conversations that's been emerging in that space is centered around public budgeting and how to shift the focus of city budgets so that they're more supportive of communities that live there rather than investing heavily in some of the same punitive strategies related to law enforcement. So the last project is directly around new economy and just transition, and it's called Project Phoenix. It's a 12-month learning and alignment project that seeks to be a space for 30 funders to think about how to accelerate a transition to a new economy. So these topics are, and the topics we'll discuss today are things that are taking place in a lot of ways. And I mentioned all of that work at NFG both as a plug, because if you're not involved, we'd love to get you involved, and just as a way for you to understand that the new economy and just transition words, this might not be work that you specifically do or think you're doing, but there are so many entry points into those conversations that intersect with health, with education, with economic justice, with racial justice, that I suspect you're all actually working on. So, and that's also just a recognition that probably in this room, there's a broad range of understanding and comfort with some of the frameworks and the tools and the work that takes place there. And we've designed this panel in such a way that we'll be able to touch on, I think, sort of the broader space, and hopefully you'll see your work within that and how your work relates to some of the conversations and the work that these folks have been doing. So with all that, I'm going to move to the panel. And immediately on my right is Denise Fairchild, the president of Emerald Cities. Woo! To her right is Amaka Agbo, the New Economy Fellow at the Movement Strategy Center. Yay! And next we have Jose Garcia with the Cerna Foundation. Woo! And Ed Whitfield, program officer at the Fund for Democratic Communities. Okay, so I've got a question for the panel to just start with, and we'll just run down the line here. And it's really it's an opening question, and hopefully you can say a little bit about the work that you do in the context of this question. But can you share with us your personal and institutional opinions on this political moment, the moment that we're in now, regarding transitioning to a just economy?
Great. Thank you, Dennis. Good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be here and to sort of share the work of Emerald Cities. You know, yesterday you all talked about, the panel talked about how we come together in different ways under conditions of crisis. Well, that's how Emerald Cities was founded in about 2008, 2009. If you guys remember, the economy was in the toilet. And it was very clear that we had to do business a different kind of way. So the titans of labor and business and community organizations and some academics came together to form Emerald Cities Collaborative. That's my board, 27 members of folks representing this multi-stakeholder coalition to figure out how to build a new social compact with our communities, how to actually think about this economy busted, what is it that we're going to build in its place? So Emerald Cities was founded on the notion of three things. One is addressing the fact, sort of the myths that the growth engine is no longer viable. This 5, 6, 7, 10% GDP return is just not going to happen, and that we have to build something that's really specific to more a sustainable economy. Currently, with the growth engine model, we are using 5 times more of the biodiversity than we can than the Earth can absorb. We just cannot continue to sustain the growth engine in the way that we have. So how do we build green? How do we green our cities and really create a sustainable economy? The second is that as we build this new sustainable economy, the investment that we make, how do we make certain that it's high road, that we're ensuring that we're creating good jobs, business opportunities, and building community wealth? And then thirdly, in this new economy, this new sector, how do we insert in that folks that have been peripheral to that mainstream economy, low-income communities of color, get to play in a center role? So it's the 3 E's, environment, economy, and equity, that we were formed around. And I think what's important about this moment is that we're seeing opportunities, I think very exciting opportunities, that also represent very daunting challenges. One is the issue of climate change and how we position this in the context of how to build communities that are also resilient. Not only that they're vibrant, but they're resilient to extreme weather, the economic bust that comes with climate change. So that's one moment, political moment that we're in. We've got to address that in the context of sustainable, resilient communities. The second is an amazing energy revolution that's taking place. And the energy revolution is partly about climate change, but it's also about the industry itself folding on itself, right? And the extractive economy, and the fact that most of the fossil fuel economy is finding it's sort of at the end of its term. And the question is, how do we dismantle the fossil fuel economy? And it is as profound as dismantling the slave economy. And if you don't believe me, just go outside and read my recent article on that. That it's addressing issues of property rights and profits and power and privilege. And we have got to figure out how we take this moment in terms of how the energy sector is moving to restructure our economy completely, to move away from fossil fuels to clean energy, but also to address all of those other inequalities, health and social inequalities that exist in the fossil fuel economy. And then finally, the health sector is also going through an amazing revolution, an amazing transition. So this is also a moment in time where we can take what the Affordable Care Act is doing for America to figure out how we transform our communities to be greener, healthier, economically vibrant, to create health, wealth, and climate resilience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Amaka?
Yeah, I think, so I'll start with the political moment and then go into my Work Movement Strategy Center, but to kind of build off of what Denise has just laid out, I think the other political moment that we're in is a rupturing open of the failures of our democratic system and the failures of our political system. And it's exposing the fact that although we've been told, although we've been trained, one person, one vote, that's how you exercise your vote, that's how you exercise your voice, actually has not actually been the way that communities have been able to generate power and build power for themselves and their families. And particularly exposing the fact that corporations and wealthy individuals are able to accumulate so much power by their extraction of wealth and resources out of low-income communities of color. And granted, these are things that communities living in poverty, living in decades of disinvestment have known for a very, very long time. I think just now we're starting to see that mainstream America is actually starting to catch on and get hip to what's happening, right? And so it's kind of showing that this piece of democracy, this piece of liberty that we lift up as our nation is actually not democracy and liberty for all. It's just for some. And that in order for communities to have the opportunity to fully exercise their power, there needs to be a way, there needs to be a strategy for communities to get access to resources, to power, to wealth that allows them to actually control, manage, and own the very assets that allow them to determine how safety, health, and well-being should look like in their communities, right? And so there's this place where it's an opportunity for us to be more strategic about how we get communities access to the productive resources that allow them to determine how they want to live. So communities having access to healthy water, communities having access to renewable energy, communities having access to land to grow their food and to have shelter, right? And so for us to be thinking beyond just the work that we do in terms of civic engagement, policy advocacy, work that I've done for many years and I love doing, I think to add on to those pieces that we actually need to figure out how are we generating wealth and shared prosperity for our communities strategically. And I think that this is a place where communities are starting to really understand that as we're in these places of reactive fights that are important, they are ready to start envisioning, they're ready to start implementing and articulating what they actually want to see in their communities. And they're starting to organize and develop the skill sets to do that in a more proactive way. And to me, that's extremely exciting. I think that's the moment and promise of the times that we're in. And so as we, even with this rupturing happening, how can we speak into that vacuum in a way that allows communities to actually step into it and seize their power? I think the other piece that I'd add to it is, and this is a place where I'm not big on technology. I don't do Snapchat. I'm not good with all the apps and stuff. But I do think technology is starting to show that we can actually accelerate our opportunity, or accelerate the ways in which we communicate with each other. I think particularly in the fight against state-sanctioned violence with Black Lives Matters, we're able to disseminate information and iterate analysis much more quickly than we used to be able to without these platforms. And so figuring out how do we actually leverage these platforms to accelerate the failures of what we're learning from the new economy so that we can get to the good stuff that actually does good work, that actually has meaningful outcomes on the ground. I think for me and the work that I do, I get to see a lot of great examples across the country of ways communities are showing their resilience, are coming together to collaborate, to do work differently. And our ability to use technology to accelerate how we're sharing that information, I think was what will catapult us into a new economy that's based on racial, social justice, as well as environmental justice and ending economic inequality. And so those pieces are extremely exciting to me. And hopefully there are more social media platforms that come out that I have to learn about. But I think that's another thing that I would actually like to see how our movements can really harness. So our work at Movement Strategy Center really focuses in on how do we end the domination and extraction of the old polluting economy, and how do we start to move communities into a place where we can have an economy based on cooperation, regeneration, and resilience. And so to that effect, I want to really lift up I'm clear that my work in this movement as the New Economy Fellow is to make sure that we are embracing and centering impacted communities and communities of color at the center of our next economy, right? We have our comrades fighting on the front lines with Black Lives Matter. We have our comrades at Standing Rock. We have so many people that are really fighting for our right to be sitting here in this room right now. And so our challenge is to figure out when that fight is done and they're ready to come home, have we actually created a space for them to step into that is not reinforcing the same habits and patterns of our old economy, but is actually truly embodying what it looks like to have an economy based on equality. And I think those are some of the exciting opportunities of this political moment and some of the pieces that we're able to experiment with at Movement Strategy Center.
Thank you. That was amazing. Good morning, everybody. I think one of the things, so I think we have touched into the environmental issues that we're dealing with and how different ways in which we use our cities, our infrastructure, our publics can actually change the reality of our communities in a way that low-income communities and communities of color benefit from it. And we went into the issue of democracy, right? I think that's another big crisis, that our democracy is not working for all of us. We still have to be dealing not only in terms of mass amount of dollars into our democratic process, but people actually are not allowed to vote as they should still, even we're in 2016, in the light of a very important, political space. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the economic aspect of the crisis that we're part of. I think for us at CERNA, clearly our program came actually out of the recession and then depression, right? Understanding that income have been stagnated, and not only with a massive amount of job, and even though we had a great uplift, right, that was slow, at the same time not only was slow, was actually a lot of low-wage workers, and at the same time contingent work, meaning people were passed as freelancers when they could have been workers, right? With all their rights, with all the benefits and so on. So we have an economy that is not necessarily assistant labor, right? And that is extracting those and actually getting on the top. And as we look at how not all companies work this way, we have seen an increased amount of activity in the finance sector, right? That actually is where the accumulation of assets is actually happening from our economy, and less action is happening, what people are calling mainstream versus Wall Street. And that is, of course, leading into a disparity in terms of wealth, an increased disparity of wealth, right? Racial wealth gap didn't happen yesterday. It's actually part of our DNA, if you want to put it that way, as we actually build this nation. And just have only exacerbated this current new way of our economies working. I want to add to this issue technology, right? I think technology could be very useful at the same time, but I think we're building different companies and platforms, right, in which workers, again, right, are not reaping the benefits of their work, right? But for consumer facing, it's actually incredible. That you can get your Uber, that you can get your Airbnb is actually fantastic. But on the opposite side, it's not necessarily benefiting the people on the ground. With that, in terms of, just in the economic aspect of it, I think it's, as you see, I think the crises are huge, humongous. But I think what this new economy frame permit us to do is actually look at the whole, right, of the economy activity and see where the intervention can happen. And more importantly for us, I think the people in the room, where philanthropy should position themselves in the middle of this crisis, right, that we're living in. So for CERNA, we clearly find ourselves battling, I think, the good old fights, right? We need to do minimum wage law because they have been depressed for so long. We need to do pay sick day, right? I think we need to organize and build power in our communities, in this work. But part of that work, I think, the opportunity that this framework adjusts, and I think a little bit what's been talking about is the role of businesses, right? The role of finance. How do we reinvent these spaces that for many in social justice, philanthropy, progressive, have been no-nos, period, right? And how do we think actually dissect the business sector in a way that we, many actually business might be for workers, might be from the environment, actually fixed in the environment because they're going to benefit from it. So I think we have a strategic, and I think at Serena we think it's strategic alliance in how business therefore should be part of social justice momentum. The other piece that I would like to mention is that we're also experimenting, of course, with different business model, right? This race to the bottom, as I've been describing in the panel, could not continue. So we have thought we're experimenting with worker co-ops, ESOPs that actually provide wealth for their workers. We know, and I think one of the main criticisms, and Ed is an expert that might talk much more about it, is that we haven't thought about it in a systemic way, right? We haven't thought about it from an economic development standpoint. And what are the possibilities of that? For that, we're actually experimenting with a conversion space. How do we convert the baby boomer generation and worker co-op and ESOPs? To create some sort of a density. With that, I would say, I think the dichotomy between businesses is important to understand that not all businesses are the same, and that local businesses are suffering a lot in this economy, right? And I think we have clear allies in this space. Our policy apparatus, our rent-seeking apparatus, not necessarily benefiting our local businesses. And when I say local business, I'm not only talking about mom and pops. I'm talking about medium-sized businesses that might be the bread and butter on some of our cities, secondary cities around the country, or mid-sized cities around the country, right? So how do we ensure that we support from a policy and finance sector those important spaces?
So Jose, could I lift up
Yeah,
some of what you
please.
said, which is very important. So, I'm sort of going to put a challenge out there because the trends of the time is we see the deconstruction of big business, big labor, and big government. And that we're moving from that into sort of this distributed, networked economy. There's his good side and his bad side on both instances.
We can have a whole conversation about this. This is good.
And so the question, what do we do? I mean, how much of the old do we hold on to, the big, labor and what it does and the safeties and protections for workers? What is it that we do for the new, where we deconstruct big business and provide ownership for local residents to build wealth? And how do we create safety nets in this new distributive, decentralized economy? And is it something that we should grow into? I think there's a lot of strategic thinking that needs to go into this trend that we're seeing. Do we hold on to the old, or do we create something new that's very supportive of the communities that we care about?
Yeah. Can I jump in?
Yes,
Mr.
please,
Moderator?
please. No, yeah.
And I know Ed Ed will have a lot to say.
Fine.
So one of the things that, I think that we should, I think the trends that are current up today are necessarily all good trends, right? The way that the erosion of government and the measure of austerity and how is that leaving our school, our infrastructure, I think we should not let that behind. The need of enforcement of minimum wage, for example, OSHA, right? Like government play a huge role in the new economy. I have a hard time pinpointing government with old, right? I think it's very new and innovative, right? So it's a very important part of that. When I think about the private sector, I think that's an important space for us to get our hands dirty, right? And I think we have left that space and we only create labor protections, OSHA, but not actually in the side of business, understanding where does it hurt, and where can we move forward from a different type of doing this work. I think that's, it's a great question.
I was interested in hearing that proceed a little bit before I try to derail the entire conversation. Again, I'm Ed Whitfield with the Fund for Democratic Communities. And I'm not actually a program officer there. I'm the co-founder and the co-managing director. But we do a lot of direct work in communities. We're an operating foundation, so we actually have organizers on our staff as part of the foundation who do a number of things. But I do spend a lot of time working in the area of new economy. I was once asked, like, what is this phrase new economy about? I said, it's simple, the old economy isn't working. So we have to have something new. There's nothing all that controversial about it. Nor is new economy completely descriptive of what it is that anyone is doing, because quite frankly, the phrase is used to mean all kinds of different things. But I think the thing that we can be certain about is that we cannot remain in one place stagnant in the current existing economy because one, is not working, and two, nothing stays stagnant. I also want to caution us that we can't really think about the economies of our local communities without recognizing that we're living in a world where there are questions of immigration that are not generated inside our local community. They're generated by global events that are taking place. We also live in a world that's dominated by people walking around with computers with more power than what it took to put a man on the moon, walking in their hands, and video cameras capable of shooting movies better than the movies in the 30s and the 40s, and photography cameras and sound recording just in our pockets. And almost nobody in this room knows how to make one of these. Isn't that true? Okay, I didn't think we'd have hands popping up.
We're in Aspen,
We could be in Aspen, we could be in Washington, we could be in a number of places, and nobody would be able to make this thing that almost everybody has one of. It's made somewhere, and we can't, and it's not made by a service economy. So here we talk about America, we have this service economy, then we walk around carrying something that's not made by a service economy, and we have flat screen televisions and automobiles, none of which are made by a service economy, because we cannot forget for a minute that the creator of value in the world remains labor, and even if it's not in your neighborhood, it's somewhere. And the conditions of that labor and what it is doing and the production and the value that is produced by it is continuing to be accumulated by a few hands that are now global in character, many of which are connected with the very foundations that we sit on and are part of, in terms of where the endowments for those foundations are invested, in a world where wars are still made, forcing people to have their children die in front of their faces while the rest of their family tries to figure out how to get to Europe or North America or someplace and try to be safe. So this is the world we live in, this is the moment. And there are two kinds of responses to it. One is a response of generosity, and the other is a response of selfishness. The selfish response we can see heavily in we see it in its blatant form in some of the political actions of the kind of right wing and new conservatism that's growing up worldwide. But we also see this, a selfish response in the ongoing neoliberal project that quite frankly created the world I just described. It didn't come out of the right wing having control everywhere. It came out of the very liberal forces that many of us are much more comfortable with because they're more polite people and they don't say nasty things in public. But these are the people that created this world that I was describing. Labor is still producing wealth, value, and capital is still accumulating it. We have to figure out at some point, how is it we're going to escape from the logic of the current system that is a system of the domination of capital, not only in our communities, but worldwide. And I think a lot of times we end up talking about what was described at a conference I was just at this weekend as, we're on this train that's headed toward disaster, and we're in it discussing what kind of music is being played and whether or not the pictures on the wall are hanging straight, and not talking about where in the world is this train going and what would be the conditions under which we can shift it to a different track, toward a different destination, which is the destination connected with the well-being of people around the world, which includes certainly the people in our communities. I think that, I think sometimes we're a little narrow in this political moment of thinking about the economy in terms of the wage system that certainly dominates it, when in fact, I drive down the street and there's some neighborhoods where I know the main source of money is not wages. The main source of money in some of the neighborhoods I pass every day is transfer payments from the government, whether it be SNAP, Medicaid, welfare payments under whichever name it has now, or what I'll call simple commodity production, which includes everything from selling CDs to Lucy cigarettes, which you can get killed for, can't you, to drug trafficking, to people cutting grass, lawnmowers. So there are a few types of simple production that are legal and okay. Most of them are illegal in this country. To ongoing subsistence, where people still engage in cooking, working in the house, and things that are never monetized. And the last form of income that exists is rent. It's the money you get from owning things, whether it's a bunch of money that you have invested in stocks or it's a bunch of property that you rent out. But that's not very much of the income, but we certainly see a lot of income from transfer payments, petty commodity production, subsistence in communities, and yet we talk about the wage portion of income as though it's the only thing we have to correct. And maybe it's because wage scales more easily. We think about people doing this massive stuff, but we've seen wage descale in this country where the manufacturing sector has largely been lost. And at one point I was involved with some people who were talking about the fact that if small businesses could each one add an additional employee, that would end unemployment in this country. Just the number of people because of the proliferation of small business. So there's certainly something to be said about the potential scalability of the massive other kinds of ways that people make money. But I say all of this to say that unless we shift something fundamental, and in my thinking it is around shifting ownership and shifting away from the domination of capital, we will find ourselves locked into this logic, the current logic of the existing system, which quite frankly can have progressive reforms, but as we have seen from them, the cutbacks in those same things will be reversed out of the needs of, again, the system of the domination of capital. And in that context, we have to look at the role of philanthropy and whether it is putting its resources into communities in such a way as to fundamentally change the dynamic of where the resources live, or is it continuing to put its resources into the more lucrative speculative investments on Wall Street, which maintains that domination of the existing logic, of the existing structure, and then letting the trickle-down benefits from that, some small percentage of that, go into communities in such a way that will fundamentally never change the existing logic of the current system. So that's the challenge we have, and I think that's the moment we're in. And at some point we'll talk about the specifics. I can talk about what my organization's doing.
So thank you all. I told you that y'all would learn something. So I want to shift a little bit. So you set a really strong context of the moment we're in, the work that's led to this place. And I want you all to talk a little bit more about what are the formations out there that either you're involved with or that you're seeing that are working to address this. And in what ways are these formations working, if they do, across sectors?
So I'll take a stab at two that I'm involved in, Emerald City's involved in. One is, and it really relates to the two momentous occasions we talk about in the health sector and the energy sector. There's an amazing collaboration of community organizations that are looking to anchor institutions and foundations, I say, that's looking to anchor institutions to reinvest in building a different kind of community that's promoting health, wealth, and resilience. One is that I'll point out is in the Oakland, Richmond area, and we've had many of our funders at this table, the California Endowment and Kresge and the San Francisco Foundation, come together with community to figure out what's the regional economy like in that East Bay, San Francisco area. How much sort of value is in that economy, and how can we extract the purchasing power of those anchor institutions to build something new and different? We just completed an amazing feasibility study and showed that there's $6.5 billion of purchasing power that can be reinvested in the community, and have targeted the food sector very specifically in a way that will be designed to deconstruct the sort of global food economy and create a local food economy that's sustainable, green, and owned by the community along the entire supply chain. So we have Kaiser as one of the key anchors in this community that's made a real commitment, as other anchors, to really taking at least 10% of its food budget. Actually, they just made a commitment to go 100% local and 100% sustainable. And the existing food suppliers cannot meet that. They're at best 20, 30% of their demand. And so they've also made that commitment then, let's figure out how we build the local food infrastructure so that we build food cooperatives and otherwise provide a supply chain from the production to the processing, to the retail and distribution elements that's really grounded in our community. So it's an amazing set of opportunities, not only in food, but also in the energy sector, in some waste sectors that we're looking at. And it really suggests to us that, philanthropy can't do it alone, but that you guys primed the pump for us to bring the community to the table, to investigate where are the assets, where are the resources that are out there that we can garner, including the public sector resources, to bring something, to create something and reimagine, re-engineer and rebuild something new in our community that's community-owned and community-controlled. So these are spaces that are happening. It's happening in the Bronx as well, where we're working with Montefiore Hospital, for example, to look at where asthma is coming from and how do we find the cluster of asthma cases in the Bronx to go in and redo these buildings. But you have to organize the tenants, because a lot of these buildings are owned by slum landlords. And they are not going to, even if you give them money to clean up their buildings, they're not going to be sort of friendly. They haven't been friendly to us retrofitting their buildings. So we're doing tenant organizing and tenant demands to withhold, rents, so that we can get the buildings cleaned up in a way that helps them with the health challenges that they have and going to the emergency room all the time with their kids with repeated cases of asthma. Then let me shift from sort of the health sector and how we can extract the ACA to create new communities, because the whole idea of community health needs assessment is so huge, where we can look at the social, environmental determinants of health to create communities, to really shift to this other cluster of work that's happening around energy democracy. Because there is, as I said, this revolution going on in the energy sector, and there is a way of deconstructing and taking energy assets away from utility sectors and putting it into the hands of the communities. I love the work, for example, of the NAACP, and they're going down into rural communities where there are rural energy co-ops knocking on doors and saying to folks, do you know you own an energy company? Many of these communities don't even realize that they are owners of these co-ops. And so what does it mean to take that and turn it into power and to change it into an asset that's going to first make them healthier, but also create wealth at the same time? And there are other efforts in terms of community-controlled energy infrastructure, microgrids, and how we actually look at some of the state legislation that's come down, community choice aggregation, which is to take the utilities sector and put it in the hands of government, which is putting it in the hands of the public sector to make it cleaner, to make it cheaper, to make it more accessible to low-income communities of color. These are the movements that are taking place, and they're happening very quickly. And some of my colleagues that I talked to last night in New York is driving. The entire sector is recognizing that distributed energy is the future. When you have extreme weather conditions and the grid goes down, even if it's a cyber attack, all right, everything stops. Your transportation stops. You can't cook. You can't plug in your iPhone. You can't do anything when the grid goes down. So this whole idea of energy resilience has become an important element in everybody's mind's eye. So people are really looking, the utilities looking to harness this new energy infrastructure, and the community, we are trying to fight them to say, oh, no, you can't have this. All right, this is the first time in 100 years that we have the right to own and control the sun and the wind in our own communities, to bring it into our communities to promote community wealth, health, and resilience. So these are some of the clusters of work that's happening, underfunded, not being funded at the level of scale that has to happen, and not being funded at the pace at which is taking place. Because as these new systems are being developed, if we're not at the table right now, we're going to lose another 100 years of opportunity to promote democracy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
I'm gonna get to your question, but I want to come back to this piece that Ed ended with, because I think it's really important. Something that I've been reflecting on a lot is I spend a lot of my work trying to understand what are the tools and strategies that communities need access to be more effective with their work. And in working on some of the projects that I do at Movement Strategy Center, one thing that's come up for me is what are the tools and strategy that foundations need to be more effective in how they do their work. And particularly, there's this place around the Capitol question and the money question, and how we can more easily disseminate money to communities that need it. And not just the philanthropic grant dollars, but a whole full range of full spectrum capital that can really help communities step into this place of ownership, control, and management. As a really short example, I'll share one of the projects I'm working on, Restore Oakland, which I'll touch on in a little bit, is a really exciting initiative. We've been able to receive a lot of support from foundations, and particularly foundations see that this project is innovative and it's exciting. And what has been interesting is asking to have conversations with foundations on their program-related investment side and talk to those program officers. Then we engage in a conversation around risk. For me, the personal risk is what happens if Restore Oakland is actually not in the Fruitvale neighborhood, right? What is at stake for the communities that are relying on an initiative like this to be successful and be fully funded and capitalized? And particularly one thing a program officer lifted up for me is that in wanting to disseminate their program-related investment more quickly, the challenge is not having the in-house technical assistance needed to go through the underwriting process to be able to disseminate that capital, right? And so the bar is so high that even program officers that do want to give out that type of capital don't have the skill sets in-house to do it. And so is there an opportunity to think about how foundations can come together to collaboratively have an institution that provides that underwriting support based on the different terms for their foundation, so that we can just get the capital out the door? Because communities, in order to be successful in a new economy, they need to know how to engage with not just grant dollars, but program-related investments, forgivable loans, new market tax credits, all those different types of capital and resources that communities actually need to be successful in the long term. So since you want to throw us off, I just wanted to
Keep going.
Continue that.
Yeah.
I would never do that.
And so to come back to that, I'm really lucky to be a fellow at Movement Strategy Center because it allows me to explore and experiment with some ideas and theories of change around what's actually needed to be successful in this new economy movement. And I particularly come out of economic justice work. And so I'm really clear I'm not interested in being a part of a movement that's not being intentional about ending things around structural racism and economic inequality. And so that being said, one of the projects that I get to work on, which I just lifted up, is Restore Oakland. And so Restore Oakland is a joint initiative of the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, which I worked at for 6 years, which has been working to end mass incarceration, and Restaurant Opportunity Centers United, working for workers' justice in the restaurant industry for the last 15 years. And we're fortunate enough to have partners like Causa Justa Just Cause. So these two organizations, these two 501c3 organizations, because I think the tax ID is important as we think about governance and the role of governance in the new economy, these two organizations came together and created a joint LLC, Restore Oakland LLC, to create an initiative that's centered around creating a center for formerly incarcerated people and workers in the restaurant industry. So when we think about democratizing development or equitable development, really being able to lift up, how do we center our equitable development efforts as a community around the most impacted, right? How do we really hold them at the center of what's needed and have that inform our design and development decisions? So Restore Oakland will have restorative justice programs will be available, being able to have a space where you can actually bring together people that have been victims of an incident and the person who may have hurt another individual to engage in conversations around reconciliation and restitution and accountability in ways in which communities haven't had the opportunity to actually define what safety looks like for themselves, right? Safety has been defined as mass incarceration and more policing. And we actually think that there's another way to have a safe community. And by giving them the skills and tools to do that, we can actually change that conversation. And being able to have that same programming alongside a restorative economics where we're providing people the opportunity to get dignified, good quality jobs in the restaurant industry. Oakland was recently named the top 5 foodie city by the New York Times, which I think really lifts up the opportunity of what's emerging, the restaurant industry being the second largest industry in the United States, but the most segregated industry in the United States, right? And so when you have 20% of those jobs that are actually six-figure jobs, we can actually create opportunities for people to be able to stay grounded and rooted in Oakland in the face of rapid gentrification and displacement by providing them access to the good quality jobs that are needed, and then by providing them the tools and skills to manage the conflict that comes up. And so Restore Oakland, we were lucky enough to have the San Francisco Foundation, I think Landon's in the room somewhere. The San Francisco Foundation is one of the first foundations that said, we're going to invest in this audacious goal of two nonprofits who have never owned property that are going to purchase property in Fruitvale, and we're going to design it around the community needs and being able to set it up as an opportunity for catalytic equitable development. And so with the vision of Restore Oakland out there, then being able to engage with conversations with groups like Causa Justa, where we can take the conversation from restorative economics and restorative justice to also lift up what are the housing rights and tenants work that needs to happen, and being able to have that all in one space. So communities can go to one place to engage in all the issues and provide support for the services that impact them on a regular basis. And so, I'm very moved by Restore Oakland. I think it's a place where me being in the technical space of it, being able to understand what the corporation laws are of it, what the legal implications are, how do we actually do the project accounting and the financing for organizations that are looking to do new market tax credits, and what does that mean? So there's this place where having somebody who can actually translate the information of what's needed for organizations to actually understand the risk that we're taking on and what the promises are for the long term. So if you're in Oakland, November 2017, we hope to be opening Restore Oakland then. You should come and eat and come check out the center. We're very excited. Another initiative that we get to work on is the Blueprint. So this is, once again, stepping into that space of technology. But Blueprint is a platform that Movement Strategy Center is creating in collaboration with foundations and other community-based organizations to figure out, can we actually accelerate the way we get resources to communities, right? So if a community is actually very clear that this is the type of capital that we need to do X, Y, and Z, rather than having to engage in a whole host of conversations with different foundations that have a different desired outcomes, and figuring out, well, how do I frame my work in this way, being able to say, this is actually what we're doing and this is what we need. And being able to then have foundations on a platform that can also say, this is what we have and this is what we're looking to fund, to more quickly actually match make between how we get the capital and the resources to the movements that need to continue doing work quickly on the ground. I think for us in our work in supporting efforts like Movement for Black Lives Matters and the Blackprint, or the Blueprint, the Blackbird, sorry, there's a lot of B's in our work, Blackbird, we're really clear that the BLM movement needs the resources to continue doing the work quickly on the ground. The way in which we see communities iterating and responding is exciting and it's innovative. And we need people to be able to do that work and not be so caught up in, well, how am I going to fund it? And if there's funders that actually do want to lean into that space, how do we open up that space for them to actually just get the resources out there? And so Blueprint is one of the platforms that we're really trying to lift up and experiment that will hopefully do that. The last project I'll close on is another initiative that I consult on called Democratizing Capital East Bay. And Democratizing Capital East Bay is an initiative launched by the Solidago Foundation, the California Endowment, and Common Council in partnership with a set of core partners or community-based grassroots organizations, and really trying to understand what is actually possible when communities have access to a fund, to a pot of money that can be leveraged to advance their movement building agenda. Can we actually really help to move forward the fights that are happening on the ground when communities can actually say, we have access to this fund of X amount, and we want to invest it in this neighborhood, and we want to see you as the public sector match it, right? When communities have the opportunity to leverage that purchasing power, to leverage that capital, to say, these are the actual outcomes that we want to see. I think I think it's an exciting experiment to see what can be done. And particularly being able to figure out how to also use that fund to lift up what are the enterprises, what are the type of businesses that we are excited about, that we do think hold our values as a next economy movement, or are willing to start to move towards being more values aligned with our movements? And how do we invest in them so that there are actually businesses that are providing good quality jobs, that are protecting their workers, providing benefits, providing the safety net that we've been lifting up, and that's really important to so many communities. I think this project is very much in the starting phases. It's a place where we're learning that because communities have not had an opportunity to engage in conversations around capital in a really strategic way, a lot of the work is actually making sure that our communities just have that financial literacy and they're able to grapple with all the complexities of what money brings. Money comes loaded with a lot of feelings, a lot of pain and trauma from communities that have been historically disinvested in and oppressed. And so being able to address that as it should be, being able to have some acknowledgement of repair for the harm, and potentially even a conversation around reparations, so that we can actually then get to a place where we can talk about, well, how do we actually want to use these resources differently, and what does that look like? And how do we do it on your terms as a community? So those are some of the collaborations and experiments that we're currently in, and I'll keep you guys posted on how they go.
Yeah, when do you sleep?
Right now.
So how much we have, because I want to make sure that people...
We have about 30 more minutes. So
30
we've
more
got
minutes. So
10 more minutes for this and the next question.
Beautiful.
Okay.
So I think at CERNA, one of the things that we did in this space, we were working around co-op development, worker co-op, but I think as I started looking at my portfolio on business development, what would be a business development portfolio that looks at the issues that my partner in crime, our Will Cordray is looking at job quality, that Sean in terms of equitable economic development, actually all this get together, right? Usually these work actually happen in silos, workers right in this corner, and you alluded to some of this. People that are working in terms of business development is in this, clearly are fall into a particular way ideology, right? That it's just part of that framework of the work. And I think one of the things we thought, and we partnered with Solidago Foundation to create Project Phoenix. And I think at I can tell you a whole lethargy of things of what's working and what's not right now. But I think one of the main things that I'm finding out is some of the stuff that you were mentioning before in terms of language, right? Like, people that are working in the financial sector businesses versus the people that are working in dry environments sometimes don't have the same language, but people are living all of this at the same time. And us as funders not always are willing to step outside of our theory, nice little circles, right, that we do. And step away from that and see what actually the necessities and how people are living in place, how people are living in our cities. And I think Project Phoenix provides an opportunity to do that. And if I say one of the main things that we're getting out of it is that I'm learning what people in civic engagement are doing that is affecting how workers' right is doing their work. At the same time, it's affecting how business should be organized and how TA should be provided to ensure that that ownership actually is shared, right? So I think that's one of the main values of Project Phoenix as we move. And we have people here, Ed, Michael, and if I'm missing anybody, please, sorry for that. But the other piece that I want to raise that we're at CERN, in addition to helping to provide this space, is, I think we come back to the issue of economic development as an important place. And I think a lot of the times we want to build bricks and mortar. And I think we know that there's billions of dollars that go to subsidies every day to corporations that actually are not creating any value in our community. So I think central to the question of the economy is, yes, let's demonstrate what actually is working on the ground, but how do we ensure that we can scale this by using public policy, right? Change the way that we do economic development that actually support some of the work that actually that are actually building ownership, that are actually creating good jobs. And I know at this point sounds like a pretty hard lift, and which is, right? But I think that shouldn't stop philanthropy to think and fund the necessary work there in that area. The last thing I will say, that important thing that we have noticed is governance, right? We want a different way of doing economic development, but sometimes, I don't know, my observation in not all cities, but a lot of cities, we got people that think about social justice every day in the mayoral office, but when you look at the economic development, it's the same old, right? So how do we build a capacity in social justice from they have similar values that actually are in this position of power in economic development, in treasury, right? That look at the world economics in a different way. We can't continue silo the work of economics as one place that social justice cannot coexist, and everything else lives in this other paradigm that is caring, that is for social justice. I think we need to figure out how to make it together. I think the new economy provide a good, and just transition provide a good frame and space for philanthropy to do just that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I wanted to outline some things in several different arenas, local, regional, and national activities that the Fund for Democratic Communities is engaged with that we think, impact the discussion we're having. At the local level, we have been involved with some people developing a grocery store in a food desert, a community that's been a food desert since 1998. This was a community that, as we had engaged with some people in the cooperative food movement, they assured us that this community was too black, too poor, and too uneducated to ever have a successful food co-op. And we will be opening this $2.5 million project. We'll have a national grand opening on the 4th of November this year. It took about 5 years to do it, and it's a lot of work. And this working class, this African-American working class community in Greensboro will have its own grocery store that it owns as a business asset. Doesn't own the building, and some people are hung up on whether or not you're owning property. And I think property ownership, particularly in a world of speculative land manipulation, is a very concrete decision. A lot of people who say it's always better to own, if they had bought in 2007 thinking that it was better to own, they would have found themselves owning some property that they would never get back what they had to pay for it. Because I did. I bought a condo once upon a time. I know. So it's not always better to own. I should have rented some small place, saved my money, and waited till the crash. Anyway, so the RCC grocery store is one project at the local level. The way we engage in philanthropy is by giving mainly grassroots matching grants, which is to say that that we're helping people to broaden their contact in the communities in which they work as a requirement of our support, which is that we're trying to weaken their dependency on philanthropy rather than strengthen it by the grant funding that we do. The other regional activity we're engaged in is building the Southern Reparations Loan Fund. I'm glad you raised the question of reparations. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I think there's a certain kind of reparations framework that recognizes that slavery was the economic engine of the development of the Industrial Revolution and the financial world that we live in right now. As such, it is an absolute abomination and a shame that those people who were the producers of that system, and I will call them the producers in that system rather than the victims, continue to live lives where they are without access to the very resources that they gave rise to out of their labor. And the other work we're doing is developing some regional training around cooperative economic development that helps with utilizing the financing opportunities that will come out of the Southern Reparations Loan Fund to again build up community ownership of business assets, productive business assets, as a means of again breaking out of this logic where people are employees and continuing to produce value for someone else. The other thing we're doing is we're engaged nationally with building a financial cooperative of other loan funds, much like the Southern Reparations Loan Fund, using much of the same framework of non-extractive finance, which again is to finance productive entities and only get repayment on the loans as those entities generate more profit than than they had before the lending activity took place. And the kind of metaphor that is in my head that just makes this very, very clear is think about a commons where you could graze your cows or grow your food or hunt or wherever. When you are borrowing from the financial cooperative, you are accessing these common resources. You then are able to be productive, and that which you produce, you keep. It's yours. But you don't get to keep the commons. You don't get to dig up the topsoil and take it home with you. You grow in it, and hopefully you leave it better than you found it, so that generations to come continue to do it. It becomes a new logic of a way of seeing access to resources. And in relationship to the question of land, it's not even so much land, but access. It's not the question of owning it. Owning land used to be thought as strange as owning air or owning water. But now more and more there are people considering owning air and owning water because the technology for it has emerged, and our destruction of air and water resources, much like our destruction through overuse of land resources, is causing some people to actually contemplate that. I still think it's an abominable idea, and that even land ought to be something that we have stewardship for, we share, we access, we use, we're productive on it, we get to keep the productivity of our labor on it, and we're talking about constructing, again, a financial cooperative based on the same principles of our access to our commons access to finances as well as commons access to land. And the last thing that is on our list of what we're doing is we're going to sunset in 2020. In other words, my foundation is in business to go out of business because we can either take the access to resources we have and invest them on the stock market and then use the return from that to continue to grow our assets and use a little bit of it in the community, or we can take our assets and put them into the community and let the community productivity engage and increase the community. So then the community is now in control of those assets and its future owned in perpetuity. So we see communities in perpetuity. We say foundations as being temporary and instrumental in the perpetuity of the development of communities rather than the ongoing development and increase of a measure of control. Because when I think about the domination of capital, part of the capital which dominates is the capital that's contained inside philanthropy. So that's part of the domination of capital, and at some point, sliding it out. And one of the things that brings to mind is the question of metrics. We always think about the metrics for the people receiving grant funds, like how do you measure what you achieve? Well, the question for philanthropy is how are we measuring what it is we're doing? And in fact, if your measurement of what it is that we're doing isn't that you're doing something really, really good, then you ought to sunset. You ought to get the resources somewhere else where they may actually do some good under the control of the people who themselves need access to these resources and, quite frankly, who themselves have been the source of the resources. So this is the kind of multi-part thing that we're engaged in now. Mm-hmm. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that if we have more time.
Mm-hmm. So I want to actually, I've got another question, but I want to open up to the audience. So you've heard a lot, right? You've heard a lot about systems, about this moment. You've heard about different entry points into this conversation. And you have a panel of experts here, some of the best known experts on these various topics in the country. So what are your questions for them? There's one right there. Do we have a mic runner? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Joseph Larios. I'm from Arizona with Vitalist Health Foundation. And this conversation has been amazing for me. I'm really new to philanthropy. I just got on the board a few months ago and have been in the organizing world for most of my professional life. And I want to offer what this crystallized was a critique, actually, I have, and I'm not sure if it's founded, so I'd like to offer this up to you all and see what you have to say. So I come from Arizona, where we've been deregulating land and business since the 30s, right? We became the right to work state in 1945, so that as part of our recruitment of industries from the East Coast was part, like we have cheap land, cheap labor, and they'll never unionize. And that's still the case like today, right? Like even now. In Arizona is oftentimes the leader, not just in policies like SB 1070, against our migrant population, but in a lot of these deregulatory practices around land and business. I mean, it's not King Cotton anymore in Arizona. It's King Developer, mm-hmm. right? And even in Phoenix, where we see this a lot, right, where it's like our liberal democratic bastions in like a very, very conservative state, you know, folks that I myself worked hard to elect and put there get locked into this idea of development is king, developers are king. And so what crystallized today in terms of what philanthropy could potentially do, it's been my experience that philanthropy, well, it's not like we don't have right foundations there, but foundations that would be in rooms like this are not in Arizona. And the thing I've heard more often than not is that Arizona lost cause. It's too hard. It's too crazy. But what I hear you saying is that Arizona's like leading on these practices, right? It's one of those states that's leading our country's business, culture, and community that reinforces folks from my own community to want to go into real estate, right? I also lost my house in the foreclosure crisis, and I was sold my house by a friend who comes from the South Side who got into real estate because that's the hustle. And so I just feel like if there's a critique that I have that I would like to offer you and hear what you have to say, it's that philanthropy has been non-existent in this way in Arizona, where it's like we're pumping out these types of policies around deregulating land. Even now, we're going to be the first to hit the water crisis when it comes to the Colorado River Pact, right? Like that's all going to play out on a political scale in Maricopa, where Scottsdale uses 2 times the water per square foot that South Phoenix does. And these are the practices that are coming out of Arizona, and these conversations aren't being had in Arizona because these conversations aren't being held. And if it's from philanthropy, I don't see that there, and I feel like it took years to get, right? I want to give credit to Neighborhood Funders Group and Lorraine Ramirez and Vitalist Health Foundation and Raquel Gutierrez, who worked really hard to get Arizona represented in spaces like this. But if that's the case, then I just feel like that's my critique then of philanthropy, is that they've been too scared to go into those conservative areas that's leading the country. And if New York is going to come out with some amazing things that I'm hearing that I've never heard about before, they're going to come face to face and head to head with states like Arizona, who in again, our liberal bastions would not even consider hearing things like reparations or understanding development as restorative justice, right? Looking at our equitable transit-oriented development, which is all the rage of our city, and they have no idea what that even means because they've not been in places like this and they've not been exposed to conversations like this. So that's my critique that I got from this conversation of philanthropy, and I'd really like to hear what you have to say as someone who's very new to philanthropy.
I'd like to speak to that because you're raising some really important questions about development that while you may see very intensely from where you are in Arizona, I think almost all of us see wherever we are, because there's a certain role that developers as such play across this country that is key to understanding what the realities of a mature capitalist system are, just to be blunt in my language. Developers get a chance to look at nature and space, not from the standpoint of how will people use it, but how is it that value can be created here that will end up in my pocket, because I'm a developer, and I got connections. I got connections with bankers, I've got connections with government folk, so I have access to the resources and the regulations required for me to do this development. And this stuff I'm gonna put in my pocket comes as a result, again, of labor. So somebody's gonna go build something, whether it's condominiums, strip centers, swimming pools, it doesn't make any difference. Whatever it is more valuable than it was before it was built. And the wages get paid to the person who built it, and all of the extra value accumulated is now owned by the developer, who will often flip it and move that money into another development, and this is an ongoing practice. And they can even take something that people would find perfectly usable and tear it down just so they can build something else new there so that it's going to have value and create more value. So we have to look at the role of developers in the whole country. And I think that there's a possibility, and philanthropy has a chance to play a role in this if it wants to, of helping to facilitate communities as their own developers, so that the owners of this created new value in that development become the communities themselves. So where the regular paradigm is that in the existence of a market failure, developers are given incentives by local governments typically in order to guarantee the profitability of their engagement in the hope that some social benefit will trickle down. The community as developer sees the creation of community entities that are directly involved in what they want created in their community, so that the social benefit is direct, and then the local government can facilitate the economic feasibility and sustainability of this in order to make sure that this social benefit is directly realized. This is the idea that we've been developing and trying to share with people of community as developer, and it had to do with the work around the grocery store I talked about, where we were able to get $250,000 from local government that they were reluctant to do based on we don't do this. And it's like, well, you should do it because you make these kind of funds available to developers all the time. So this is a community wanting to develop something of its own. And I think we ought to do that more and more, because the question is, who owns the development that goes on across this country? And we have a role in helping to shift the conversation and shift the resources so that the owners of development within a community are broadly the community itself in a democratic way, rather than a handful of individuals in that community who pocket it and move on to the next project.
So I think what you're saying also, what I hear is Arizona get very little love, right? And I think that that's happened a lot of, conservative places in the United States. I think that's a fair assessment of, I think national philanthropy not necessarily is a bastion of going very, in these hard places. And it's a hard question, right? I mean, when you put, I think I agree with you. I think if philanthropy was more thoughtful in terms of the needs and where do we need to be our philanthropy ourselves to take the nation, right, to our next moment, probably have to do with the South, the Southwest, right? And where people really, leadership, creative people are doing the work. And it's true that the concentration mainly happened in the coast, right? At the same time, if I think about it, I also think about limited resources, right? I think about if you see the amount of dollars that, and this is not an excuse, but the picture that stays in my mind is that when I see the amount of philanthropy dollars compared to the $1 trillion that is part of the financial sector. And it's outstanding, the difference. It's like a drop in the bucket, right? And it's also daunting, but also humbling, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say that that there's other cities that we should talk offline that actually have increased their resources by partnership and being very thoughtful in terms of who they bring to the table, who they bring in the table to talk about restorative justice that is not you, that talk about the stuff that Ed is talking about that doesn't have to be local philanthropy. Because we were talking last night, that relationship between national philanthropy and local philanthropy, as problematic they could be, it also, we should find ways into, work it to our purpose of creating a more just society. So I know I said more code work without a lot to be said, but I think it's an important conversation to have.
So I want to bring it back to the audience. We've got about 10 minutes left. So I want to see if there's some other questions if folks have. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lisa Rangeli with the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy. And I think this is a two-part question. Mm-hmm. One is, several of you have spoken to the fact that foundations often either don't tap that 95% of their assets to advance their mission, or they may even be investing in things that are actually contradicting or undermining their mission. So I'm curious to know, in your conversations with other funders, what has worked to help them see that contradiction or that sort of wasting of that resource? So kind of what works to get folks to start thinking about tapping that 95%? And then the other question is, it's really hard sector-wide to figure out how much really is going toward mission of those assets, and to what extent should we be fighting or advocating for more transparency so that it's just a lot easier to see which foundations are doing that and what percentage of the sector is actually investing in local communities through its 95% that's beyond the grant making?
Well, maybe I'll just, I don't know, get in trouble here.
Do it.
The greatest part of your resources are in your endowment, right? And so, the PRI money is really ought to be just grant money, or recoverable loans, but we won't go there. So just figure out what's happening with your MRIs, and your MRIs are really locked into, conventional Wall Street numbers. You've got to get high high or single digits or double digit returns, and that's not the kind of patient capital that's really required to go into the kinds of projects and groups that we're talking about. I don't know how you break out of that. I mean, Ed, I think it was just quite amazing how you really reshaped the idea about how philanthropy should be investing in communities and having communities, generate its own assets. I don't know how you get there. I'm not a funder, but I can tell you your resources don't work for communities for the most part.
I mean, I think as what we have noticed inside of philanthropy, inside of Cerna, and we just went through an MRI process and PRI process, and I think sometimes philanthropy get very excited about the tool and don't think what should be our strategic role with that tool and what are we actually solving for. Sometimes I feel honestly that sometimes our PRI too close to the actual financial market. So but it's the issue of risk, and honestly, it's also the issue of risk inside your board, right? And and understanding then the power dynamics in a foundation, right? In terms of who's making that decision versus what's your role as a PO, but you can move some of that. It depends managing up to a certain degree. The other point I wanted to make is the MRI is an interesting space, right? Because I think what we have seen is that depending, again, the issue of strategy. What is your strategy? What are the issues that you care about? And what are the best tools with your MRI? One clearly is investment. But one clearly is actually staying as part of a shareholder and influence Walmart, right? At the same time, you can have direct investment, or you can. So so what I learned through this process is that it's less important about how complex it is, but just problematizing how Ed did so well, right? And your board gets it. I mean, our board is a family foundation, and it's how do you bring the conversation to the board? And maybe what Danielle was talking about yesterday, it goes back to relationships, right? And how you build a relationship with your board of trust. And also what I've seen also is how do they see other people doing it? So it decreases the amount of tension that what it actually means to do it. I don't know if that's helpful, and point to actual examples to do it.
So we have time for one more question. Anyone else want to ask a question in the audience? There's one back there.
Hi, Suzanne Bowen, the author, working on the book about place-based initiatives. This is for Jose, and wondered about specific examples of philanthropy getting involved such that there's policy changes that help local businesses.
So what we're doing, thank you, I love this work. So one of the things that we're doing is, so we started organizing funding. We're not organizing businesses, right? So we're funding a group of organizations that have been organizing around minimum wage issues. But, and I think as part of their doing that campaign, they understood that as good organizers, any organizer will do, understand that that will not mobilize local businesses. I mean, it might get you through a campaign, but it's not going to get you through a long-lasting relationship with these businesses, right? So increasingly what we start doing is looking at is having this organization politically mapping these businesses and understanding that how heterogeneous actually they vote. And how do they show up in political spaces, right? So from that, then doing a landscape analysis, again, not me, this group of organization, we need a policy platform that talks about the needs of local businesses. And I will just tell you a personal story in which, for 3 years, I was managing a bodega, right? And actually, my father-in-law's bodega in Hartford, Connecticut. And one thing I noticed, and if you are any businesses, local businesses, you understand the differences between who's getting merchandising first, who's getting cheaper merchandise, who's getting served better, and how you can penetrate better markets, right? And that's one of the things local businesses actually sometimes don't have the time, but also are cut off of the process. And that's part of our economic reality, right? So how do we build that agenda of local businesses that is actually that question? I think what is important for these local businesses, that question the importance of this broader business that bring very little, that extract more than bill in our communities. And that's been part of it. The other big area that I think local businesses have looked into is finance. One of the areas that we're really wary but thinking about is that we can fund a CDFI in this corner. But there's something systematically wrong about the role of finance and how and who's getting the best of it, right? So I think we should, local communities should explore finance, understand CDFI funds, but how do we systemically look and think about changing so more capital actually is deployed in our community? And that's a much longer conversation that I'm more than happy to engage in later time.
So in the last few minutes, I want to just give everybody in the panel about a minute or so to just go down the panel and give your final thoughts. What else would you want to make sure this audience knows? Or what are the big questions you think that philanthropy and the field need to grapple together?
Great. All right, well, I only have two things that I'd love for you to take away with. One is just imagine this new economy being radically different, and know that you've got some key levers in your favor. One is there's the urban ag movement, localized. There is the local energy, clean energy movement, local. It is there even water, on-site water management. All of this local. The health movement. All these are sectors that are becoming more local, more community-based. How do we harness and reimagine these local, decentralized, empowered communities that's owned by the people that live there? It's happening now. What are we doing with those levers to make it happen in the high road way? Second thing I would say is think sectors. When you talk about scale, we can talk about community groups here and 100 jobs here and one co-op there. Our fundamental challenge to scale is in changing the new economy is to change sectors that make up the old extractive economy. Let's change the utility sector. Let's change the food sector. Let's change, the health sector so that they are absolutely going to be more democratic, more inclusive, they pay well, as at the same time that they're and decentralized, that we build the local community to really create the new economy that serves the local economy. So those are two things, and I would just say, I'm not taking these infographics home, so go out there, and it's really how you change the energy sector and what's required, the kind of investments required to take the energy sector from a low road to a high road frame.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll start off by saying in my closing comments, one of my concerns about the new economy movement is that what I'm currently seeing, the people that have the opportunity to engage in this space are the people that have access to the disposable income, of the leisure time, and are actually risk tolerant and able to actually experiment with new models of what it could look like. And my fear is that the new economy could end up being a space where we only actually end up growing the inequality or the income gap if we are not intentional about who actually gets to shape that space. And I think we see this with, I lifted up technology earlier in my piece, but I think the other side is that technology also helps to accelerate the accumulation of wealth. And I think that is what we're seeing with Uber and Airbnb, right? The sharing economy is what my parents just called community back in Nigeria, right? But we figured out how to capitalize it and generate profit off of it. So if you have stable housing and if you have a good car, then you can actually generate more profit. But those that don't only end up falling further behind, right? So we actually need to be clear about what's at stake and what's currently shaping up. In response to that, I think that there's a place where I want to be clear that foundations, we're still looking to foundations to continue to invest in the organizing, the grassroots building, the power building that makes it possible for us to be effective in this movement. If the new businesses, the new platforms that we're creating are not connected to a movement building strategy, once again, we're moving farther and farther away from our intentions of creating racial and social justice through the new economy. And so in order to make that happen, I do think that I would love to see a space where more foundations would be interested in grappling with the question of how do we actually transfer ownership and equity to communities. And particularly, I think I saw somebody from the Jacobs Center for Innovation here. I think Market Creek Plaza, I think the Renaissance work that Ed is doing and some others are really critically thinking about, can we actually create equity, have an equity stake in specific businesses in our community, and when the time is right, actually transfer ownership to our communities. And so communities may not be ready at that very moment to make that happen, but can foundations create the impetus for communities to organize and create the governance structures to actually be able to take up ownership once they're ready?
The only thing I would like it's, I think what we heard yesterday, our communities are crisis and crisis and crisis, and I think we're asking here to envision, right? And sometimes that could be look as a dichotomy or contradiction, but I think they're not, and I think it's where do philanthropy put the resources for that to happen, right? In those organizations that actually do some of the visioning, and it's going to be countercultural. Do that visioning, right? And I think that's, for me, it's something that we should stick at how ideology lives through all this our different world, and how do we work around it.
I'm sorry to have the last word here, but if you think about philanthropy, as having money coming in and money going out, one of the things that would be worth thinking about is this question of impact, which is the harm being done by the way we have money coming in greater or lesser than the good that we are able to do with the money going out? I'm willing to bet that if there was some real transparency about it, and we were to find out what the participation of the endowments that exist are doing in terms of the things that we care about, which are how communities can build meaning and meaningful lives, meeting their own needs and elevating the quality of life. If we were to look at that, we would probably find that the harm being done by how the resources are generated to later being given away exceeds the capacity to repair those things as it goes back into the community. We'd have to look just at a short period of time, the last 20 years, how much better is the world for all of the work that we have done in it in the last 20 years? I mean, we've eliminated war, we've eliminated hunger, we've eliminated homeless. Oh, well, I'm describing a different world. The world we're in, hunger, homelessness, war, despondency, injustice in the street, where young people can be murdered with impunity, still exists. So what have we been doing for the last 20 years, if not to say going back further? So it is for those reasons that I say we have to dramatically shift our understanding of what it is we're doing. This is not an incremental thing, or we can just keep doing a little more of what we're doing and then we'll see a needle move. Needles may very well move. They seem to be sticking into people. But we really do need to find a way, again, of shifting the fundamental logic of what we are engaged in. And I think that has to do with putting resources back into communities so that those communities control it in the course of them making meaning with the access to the resources that they have created.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's thank the panel, folks.